Welcome to your in-depth weekly astrology overview and Zodiac forecast for week beginning the 1st of September. I'm going to share some standout details to look out for to begin with, then on screen the event chart right at the start of the week, which always provides an influential backdrop. I'll then go through all the key influences in detail to give a clear picture of what we can collectively expect. Stay with me to the end. I'll then go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces to give you a flavour of what you can expect in terms of your ascendant, sun or the moon. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. A very warm welcome. If you're new to my channel, if you have any thoughts, please feel very welcome to share them. If you're a returning visitor, all your views and interactions are greatly appreciated. If you've yet to subscribe, please do so now, but also click or tap the bell notification symbol. Now, this week begins with Saturn, the mighty Saturn, very much to do with time, but also structures. Can be a little bit of a limiting influence, returns back to the sign of Pisces, which it left on the 25th of May. And over the next 5.5 months, through to the middle of February, is coming to the end of a colossal 29.5-year cycle. I'm going to unpack that for you. On Tuesday, Mercury, the planet of communication, but also of precision, returns to the second of its two homes of Virgo, and is going to be very influential through to the middle of this month. If we do need to cut through and get to the detail, Mercury here will certainly help. But Uranus, the planet of surprises, but also a planet which can push us to change things up and very much to do with innovation, does go into a retrograde on Saturday, which goes through to early February next year. But it is going to retain its sparkling alliance with the planet of transformation of Pluto. I'll share more about that. And then as the week comes to a close, we have the lunar eclipse in the sign of Pisces. But it's a lunar eclipse that's very close to the North Node and also is blessed by the energy of Jupiter, which is the traditional ruler of the host sign of Pisces. That lunar eclipse provides a backdrop for the next 6 months. I'm going to unpack that for you too. On the screen now, I'm showing the event chart right at the start of the week. As ever, we need to be mindful of the position of the sun, and it starts this week just still in that first decan or 10 degrees of the sign of Virgo, but it's going to be moving midweek into the second decan, which is subruled by Saturn. So that's going to push us to take things a little bit more seriously. But if you look at the position of the moon, the other luminary, it's right at the top of the chart in the 9th house. The moon in Sagittarius likes to be a free spirit, but it's in a T-square with the nodal axis. That's really interesting. I feel the moon in Sagittarius could push into the open something that's been hidden, particularly with the North Node in Pisces, which can be about secrets, or it may be something to do with practicalities that we need to free ourselves from. Perhaps we're a little bit too addicted to some of our routines. So as I mentioned in my preamble, Saturn is reversing, it continues its retrograde into the sign of Pisces. Pisces is the last of the 12 zodiac signs, of course. The first is Aries. So this year has been unique in that Saturn started the year in Pisces, went into the sign of Aries, now back into Pisces, because Aries is about new beginnings and Pisces very much about the endings. And Saturn, because it does influence the big patterns of time, is so very powerful. So if you are older, something that you may have started 29.5 years ago could finally reach a culmination point by the middle of February next year. It's also possible that something that isn't working may come to a close, because the sign of Pisces, the host, has the co-ruler of Neptune, which can erode the foundational and structural energies of Saturn. Saturn doesn't like being in the limitless sign of Pisces. So if there's something that isn't structurally sound, a relationship, an involvement, a business, perhaps maybe to do with some of our interests, it's possible that Neptune can just set the conditions to challenge that. Then again, if something is robust enough, even if it's not perfect, we can use the hard work and the application of Saturn, but also the intuition of Pisces to try to work things out. Now, I mentioned about Mercury moving on Tuesday into Virgo. By the 13th of this month, Mercury is going to align with the Sun in GEMINI. So there is an opportunity, despite the lunar eclipse at the end of this week in the dreamy Pisces, to use our logic and to get to the nub of situations in a very precise way. But this particular Pisces season that we're coming into in September is going to be a juggle between that more spiritual, psychological and healing side of our situations and the demands of the more tangible world, which is the Virgo energy. But Mercury here suggests if there is some tidying up to be done, some reordering with paperwork, if we need to catch up on anything that's perhaps been delayed, because Mercury has been in an extended journey through the flamboyant Leo, through the retrograde season. And now if we did come up with a creative plan, we have an opportunity to bind it into something that's more tangible and workable indeed as well. Now, Uranus, as I mentioned, does go retrograde, but it is going to continue that link with Pluto. If we think that Pluto's in the sign of Aquarius, which Uranus rules, the modern ruler of, looking at things afresh, being open to different ideas, accepting that some parts of our situation will need to be reformed, and with the backdrop of the Virgo energy, particularly with the semi-sextile to the lovely position of Venus in Leo, if we are up to just amending things and being a bit more efficient, even if we are doing something that is fresh, that's a very, very good combination. But that lunar eclipse on Saturday and the blend with the North Node tells us if we have been in some ways skewing our instincts, this is an opportunity to get in touch with them. And Jupiter in Cancer, which is exalted, is saying that if we have faith, faith is very important. We live in a world where there is a kind of trendiness with science, but how often do we hear scientists now believe, in other words, they've updated the theory that was never proved, and yet scientists hold all this imaginary power because they have the facts and figures. So it's very important that we have that instinctive connection. Why is it when we walk the dog, for example, the dog will like some people and not others, even if they're perfectly pleasant? Same with other dogs, because they're in touch with their instincts. And really that's what that lunar eclipse is encouraging us to do. Listen to our gut feelings, but the energy of Virgo with the Sun and Mercury is still saying whatever we do get the sense we should do, how we go about doing it, that's going to be important. So we still need to be productive, and it's just about balancing those polarities. Now, if you would like to visit my new website at patrickarundell.com, you can download your free natal horoscope. It's got a tremendous interpretation. Enjoy the 3 free card tarot, but also your daily, weekly, monthly and yearly general, love and Vedic forecast. Also, you can sign up for your free daily horoscope. Why not check it out? You can get it fired to your device every single morning. So Aries, your week beginning the 1st of September forecast is intriguing because yours is a sign which has an appreciation of action, seizing the moment and being on the front foot. And with Mercury returning to the practical Virgo on Tuesday, you could have a great chance to tidy up and refine certain strands of your situation over the next 3 weeks. It's just that the mighty Saturn inverses back out of your sign and into the watery Pisces. He's going to be there through the next 5.5 months. And however much you may want to focus on those practical strands. There may be some emotional ones that are calling for your attention too. We all experience loss in our lives at some point, but if some of those have had a very profound impact on you, maybe relatively recently, maybe much more in your distant past, over the next 5.5 months, Saturn gives you the opportunity to really dive deep within yourself, but also have compassion for some of the vulnerabilities and fears that you may be having. So if you do feel a little bit lower in your psychological energy, be gentle with yourself and just know this is a huge cycle that's coming to a close that began about 29 years ago. And when we get to the middle of February, it will be the beginning of that fresh cycle, part 2, that began temporarily on the 25th of May. So there is a sense with this year that there's 1 foot in the present, but 1 foot in the past. And if you're philosophical about that, you're going to work with the energy all the better. Now, the sign of Gemini is known as being hugely mercurial when it comes to communication. And you may have found that your communication recently has heated up. You may have enjoyed some sparkling encounters, but your personal belief systems or your connection to the people immediately around you, perhaps family members, siblings, people in your community, people online, you may go through a more thoughtful phase around some of those communications, but there's still the potential to make very interesting and intriguing connections with different and new friends. But I feel anyone you're really going to bond with over the next 6 months is going to be someone with a very intuitive type of nature. I feel you need that, as well as having those upbeat and playful and at times jokey exchanges. Now, later in the week, on Saturday, the lunar eclipse is emphasizing the same energy as Saturn. It's very much to do with the part of our nature, we all have it, where we're a bit reluctant to look at our shadow side, our fears, our anxieties, the parts that may not sparkle quite so brightly in the sunlight. But this is a lunar eclipse which has rich promise because of Jupiter. Jupiter's in the part of the overall zodiac which can be very healing and links into this particular lunar eclipse, and Jupiter is the traditional ruler of the sign of Pisces, so there's some mutuality there which we can work with. So if you're up for allowing the more spiritual, psychological and emotional dimension within you, if you're up to embrace that, huge amounts of growth can unfold over the next 6 months. But ironically, you can still gain a lot this week by catching up on your admin, your paperwork, doing all the domestic tasks, and just really feeling on top of those practicalities will probably make you feel really good too. So Taurus, your week beginning the 1st of September makes me think, with Mercury having been going backwards and forwards across a very tender part of your chart, the 4th house, where you now incidentally have your ruler, that you may not have felt quite as outgoing of late. But Mercury moving on Tuesday into your 5th house is a very playful, even cheeky part of the entire zodiacal journey. And Mercury can be quite impish and is going to be linking with the Sun exactly on the 13th. So if you are a creative, or you've got ideas you're enthused about, or you just want to be meeting up with some friends, I feel that Mercury moving into that area can bring a spark. But also on Monday, Saturn, the planet of structure, does invert back into the part of your situation to do with your long-term future. I feel over the last couple of years, something that you were pretty keen on attaining lost a little bit of its luster. It may not be that you've completely stopped going for it, but maybe you've looked at the situation in a different way. Maybe some friendships have changed. Again, not necessarily in an unkind or unpleasant way. It's just you may have not quite felt the same kinship with certain people. And I think that process of trying to sort out what you really want from your long term is really going to show up very powerfully over the next 5.5 months of Saturn being in the sign of Pisces. But that's going to be amplified because of the lunar eclipse, which occurs on Saturday, and it's very close to the North Node, which is almost like a beacon for us, or a celestial instinctive beacon, which just sends out a signal that if we want to pick it up, we can be guided by it. And that's pushing you to find your higher purpose. But because Saturn can be quite resistant, and perhaps even at times lowering our enthusiasm, having faith is going to be very important, but faith in the process, because Jupiter, the traditional ruler of the sign of Pisces, is actually forging a stunning link to that lunar eclipse. So over the next 5.5 months, if you do start to align with different people, different friendships, or some of the hopes you had some while ago have faded away, I feel they can be replaced by something a whole lot better for you. But it's just there may be a shift. And because of the Sun and Mercury being in Virgo, that's the part of your situation to do with your individual self-expression, whereas the eclipse and Saturn are much more to do with perhaps satisfying other people's needs and expectations, your connections. So there is a bit of a juggle, I would say. And also with Uranus going retrograde on Friday, which is going to go on in the sign of Gemini initially through to the end of the first week of November. One of the things you may be using in terms of trying to decide on that long-term plan is how you earn money, particularly because Uranus is linking to Pluto, the planet of transformation. Well, what they say is you have a great appreciation of stability, foundations, and you often understand intrinsically what people want. With Venus, for example, in Leo at the moment, you could find yourself updating your decor where you live, making some modifications to your home, your taste often being, of course, quite exquisite. But if there is a part of you that's quite resistant to trying different things, I feel Uranus in its retrograde in Gemini initially, and the link with Pluto, it is saying if you're not quite sure about how you're going to earn money and whether it works for you in terms of your values, but also helping you to express your individual talent, just try to go with it, because I think for all of us, the world around us is changing so quickly. Just hoping that we can be resistant to these very powerful energies is not really going to work. So submitting to it could actually turn out to be one of the best things you can do, even if at times you don't quite know, just like the rest of us, exactly what the outcome will be. So Gemini, your week beginning the 1st of September sees Uranus in your sign go into its annual retrograde. And initially this will be in Gemini through to the end of the first week of November. If you have been trying some really fresh approaches recently, don't get too frustrated if they're not quite working out. The link with Pluto is sensational still, even if that too is in retrograde. It's just that you may need to bide your time to a degree, because Saturn, the planet which governs time in general, has inversed back into the part of your chart that's very much to do with big life responsibilities. Whether it's about older parents, whether it's about kids, your work, whether you're wanting to set up your own enterprise, whether you're wanting to raise your profile and achieve greater acclaim professionally, Saturn suggests through to the middle of February next year, you could achieve some very big breakthroughs, but I do feel you're going to have to work at it and be very disciplined to seize the golden prize. Now on Tuesday, Mercury, your ruler, exits a part of your chart which it's been in since late June, which is actually very redolent of the energies of your sign. Quick communication, the 3rd house. The host, however, is Leo, or was, is very prideful, but because of the retrograde, there may have been some cross wires over the last 10 weeks or so. So Mercury returning to Virgo, the other sign it influences along with yours, just gives you a chance to just take stock a little bit and maybe pause. Mercury in the fourth house is not so easy, because the fourth house is about emotion. Mercury can be about how we think. The two don't always naturally go together. Emotion is about feeling, which we get the chance to embrace with the lunar eclipse on Saturday. But what I would say, if there is or are some delicate issues that do need to be discussed, and it might be about where you live, who you live with, a family matter, just let the emotional dimension inform your self-expression, because if you try to use your mind only, your intellect, it may make it difficult for the conversation or the opportunity to really flow. Now, I mentioned already to you about Uranus going retrograde. Uranus will come back into your sign at the end of April next year for around about 7 years. So you've got that to look forwards to. And also know, when Uranus first moved into Gemini this year, it did forge some sensational angles. So your unique way of looking at things and explaining or expressing yourself is going to be in vogue generally in the years ahead. But the lunar eclipse at the end of this week echoes the energy of that Saturn retrograde. It's very important, even when it comes to ambitions or your connection to the world, or any role you have where people look up to you or you have responsibilities, that you're not too businesslike, it's not too transactional, that you retain a touch that's very much in keeping with the more emotional and sensitive potential of the sign of Pisces. Pisces is very intuitive. You can be very logical, so that's a bit of a contrast. And with Saturn in that part of your situation, if you stay only with the logic and the ambition, Saturn can be very much to do with hard work, discipline and so on, you may miss opportunities because you're not picking up the vibe. So very, very important to stay instinctive over the next 5-6 months with the backdrop of this lunar eclipse, but also Saturn inversing in your sector of success and responsibility. So Cancer, your week beginning the 1st of September sees the firm and stern Saturn return to your 9th house, where he had been for the 2.25 years through to the end of May. Now, Saturn in that area could give you an opportunity to work hard in learning something or sharing information and knowledge you have, and that industry could bring results through to the middle of February next year. But conversely, Saturn in the 9th house is a bit of a difficult blend, because the 9th house likes to be free. The sign of Pisces, obviously sharing your water triplicity, is also very spiritual, and therefore the demands of Saturn can be a bit of an abrasive match. So if you're in a situation, a relationship, in an environment, whether it's where you live or at work, that you feel hemmed in, that you don't really feel that you can be truly yourself or express your philosophies quite as freely as you would like, I think there's going to be some big decisions made over the next 5 or 6 months. But that's going to be emphasized because, of course, your ruler is the moon, and the 2 eclipses we had this month, therefore you'll feel them keenly. So the lunar eclipse on Saturday is very close to the point of destiny, the North Node. And if you don't feel that you're doing something which really matches your higher purpose or feeds your soul, that soul purpose comes from the fact that Jupiter is resident in your sign at the present time, links into the eclipse, and is asking you to stay in touch with what really works for you. But of course, Saturn represents the real world, and it can be about work. And you have, ironically, Venus, the planet of relating, but also of money, in a very strong part of your chart for everyday money. And some good news could come up for you through the first 3 weeks of this month because of the semi-sextile to Virgo. The Sun However, on Tuesday of this week, Mercury moves out of that second house and into Virgo to join up with the Sun. So if you need to think about something crisply, discuss something very practically, cut through to what's really the key issues or strands of any situation, that could be something that's very valuable. But you may still find yourself a bit conflicted between your immediate world, the third house of Virgo, and what you'd really like your situation to be. If you're suffering, for example, a little bit of weariness from the routine of life, I feel that lunar eclipse is pushing you in some ways to liberate through travel, new experiences, or downloading some fresh knowledge and information. And within all of this week, Uranus, the planet of disruption, that's very much to do with higher truths, is agitating away but begins a retrograde in the very psychological 12th house. So something deep within you, particularly with Uranus's connection to the planet of truth, Pluto, which can be about power, something could just be being aroused. It's very much very much accentuating that part of you that wants to do things that is really going to feed that deeper part of your nature and give you a sense of purpose that meets your values. So there's going to be some big conversations and a lot of talking and thinking, particularly this week, but maybe also over the next 6 months too. So Leo, your week beginning, the 1st of September, sees the gorgeous Venus in your sign, collaborating brilliantly with the Sun through the first 3 weeks of this month. If there is something you're passionate or creative about, there's an opportunity to turn a hobby or interest into something more tangible, perhaps even lucrative. But if you are wanting to grapple with everyday finances, Mercury moving out of your sign and into Virgo, its home sign on Tuesday, will certainly sharpen up your critical eye. But conversely, on the other side of the heavens, the mighty Saturn returns to Pisces for one final visit through the next 5.5 months in a total 29.5-year cycle. And that 8th house for you comes sharply into focus at the end of this week too, with a lunar eclipse. This is very much to do with where you share things, where you're most invested. Now, we can think about that in terms of stocks and shares, pensions and savings, but it can be where we're most invested in a spiritual, emotional or intimate context too. Now, Saturn, of course, can be a bit cool and limiting. If there is something around those areas which isn't working quite so well, this next half year is going to be really important. Saturn asks us to be industrious, and the harder we work, often the luckier we get. But I feel that September is going to be a little bit of a juggle between the immediate reality of your situation and where your long-term future is heading. Now, Uranus, the planet of surprises, goes into a retrograde on Friday, but it continues to forge a really strong link to Pluto, the planet of change in your sector of relating. You may find through to the end of the first week of November that you do encounter someone who's very different from you, but that actually makes them all the more appealing. Alternatively, you could be thinking about some of your long-term plans, Uranus in the 11th house, and just asking if you're really on the right track. Perhaps it's possible that a lack of finance could inhibit an idea or a more innovative concept that you have cooking away, or it could just be that some of the people that you have been friendly with for some time, if you do feel a little bit penned in, perhaps there are some expectations or control, the retrograde of Uranus is going to make you much more conscious of your need to be a free and independent person. But as that week comes to a close, there is that lunar eclipse. It is going to be very close to the North Node, so do listen to your hunches when it comes to those deepest connections, whoever or whatever they may be with. So Virgo, your week beginning the 1st of September sees Mercury, your ruler, return to your sign. But since the end of June, Mercury has been occupying a muted psychological part of your chart. It's possible at times you have wanted to be a bit more detached, perhaps step back from certain associations. Perhaps you may have also experienced some doubts. Mercury bursting into your sign can bring you into the moment, give you more confidence in the things that perhaps you've been working on, quietly developing, researching, and now you can start to take a step forwards with Mercury's help. Now, also at the start of this week, the mighty Saturn returns to your sector of relating. From the start of March 2023 through to the third week of May this year, you may have found yourself encountering some resistance at times around certain involvements, perhaps within the family, maybe with friendships, maybe even around your love life. The key is, over this next 6 months, particularly with the lunar eclipse in your opposite sign later this week, is finding that tip point between what you need in relationships, but also what you're prepared to give, but connecting to a person who can also meet you halfway. If that tip point is working well, that can mean that Saturn in that part of your chart, along with the lunar eclipse, something really significant can happen around relationships through this next half year. But the converse can be true. If you're not feeling it, even in a professional situation, especially with Uranus in the most prominent part of your chart going retrograde on Friday, if you're not feeling that you're working with people who are very inclusive, encouraging, it's a little bit isolating, you don't really feel that you're part of it. I feel that Saturn in the 7th house and Uranus going retrograde in the 10th can remind you that perhaps you need to find situations where you can have those more fulfilling connections, but at the same time where you can be truly more in touch and yourself. So Libra, your week beginning the 1st of September puts a big emphasis on the part of your situation that's to do with life, everyday patterns and routines. Not the most exciting part of our situations, perhaps, but a very important one. We know that Saturn can be somewhat limiting, but his return to the sign of Pisces through to the middle of February next year just suggests that the things you were working on for 2.25 years, from the beginning of March 2023 to the end of May this year, there may be still some strands that just need to be pushed over the line a bit more. Maybe to do with some of what you're eating and drinking, maybe to do with a lack of rest, maybe to do with a job that's not very fulfilling. But all those things are there to be worked on with Saturn's help, but also with the assistance of the lunar eclipse, which comes through towards the end of this week. Because if you can tune in instinctively to the things that need to change, that need to be a little bit more efficient, or where you need to be a bit more virtuous, the hard-working industry of Saturn with that instinctive energies is going to be really, really helpful to you. Now, this week also sees your wonderful ruler Venus in a very bubbly, glamorous and very charismatic part of your chart, linking subtly but importantly to the Sun in the more reserved 12th house. You may find yourself being drawn towards people who are really very sincere, but perhaps have a more of a spiritual dimension to their nature. Doesn't mean to say they can't be fun or stimulating companions, but people that just have an extra dimension to their nature can really call out to you. And with Mercury moving into that 12th house as well, if there's anything you want to learn or dive deep to explore, particularly of a psychological nature, any courses or reading you do could prove to be extremely valuable over the next 3 weeks. Scorpio, your week beginning the 1st of September sees the hugely influential Saturn return to the part of your chart. It's very much about expressing talent, flair, creativity, passion and joy. Now, Saturn pushes us to be very industrious, but the lunar eclipse in that part of your chart this week is blessed by the lovely vibe of the North Node, which can push you to listen to your instincts around your talents, but also is connected to Jupiter, the planet of fortune. If you are feeling that you want to be more carefree, even speculative, that particular lunar eclipse can give you cause for optimism. But what Saturn's saying, it is important to be realistic as well. But also, because Saturn is about that application, if you're not quite at the centre of things in terms of your long-term plan at the moment, or your connections to others are causing some distraction, perhaps a lot of people want a piece of you, and it may be difficult to keep all of the people happy all of the time. Now, with Mercury joining the sign of Virgo on Tuesday, the chance to socialise more and connect with friends that are important is going to be there. But if there's something you really feel that you have to give, where you want to be right at the centre of things, the prime influence, the next 5.5 months is an enormous opportunity for you to turn up the volume. And it's all about self-confidence. But also, keeping people in the loop is all about communication. So you don't necessarily have to exclude people, but you can tell them what you need to do for you. Now, if some people don't get that, with Uranus going retrograde on Friday, they may be the people that in some ways are subtly controlling your desire to be individualistic, and perhaps some of those relationships could be challenged over the next half year. So Sagittarius, your week beginning the 1st of September, ushers in a new eclipse series season, which begins on Saturday with the lunar eclipse in the healing sensitive sign of Pisces, but it's very close to the North Node, or the point of destiny. An opportunity is there for you over the next half year to shape or mould an environment where you live, or in terms of your closest relationships, that's that much more tender. And because your lovely ruler Jupiter, which is about exuberance and optimism, also feeds into this event, that can give you the confidence to perhaps just ask for what you need. But the industrious Saturn also moves into that area on Monday. That's perhaps more to do with the physical side of security. If you're not living somewhere that you enjoy, it's nudging you to move. If you live somewhere that suits you, but perhaps needs some modifications, this next half year, through to when Saturn returns to Aries, is a chance to work hard, perhaps in terms of physical changes, redecorating, perhaps fitting new kitchens or bathrooms, that kind of thing. But on the other side of the heavens, ironically, Mercury, the planet of communication, climbs to its highest point in the sky. And just as this emotional, nurturing and homely stuff is shaping up, an opportunity could emerge from you in terms of your work. And it's possible that your profile is going to increase. You're going to gain more recognition, which could be very gratifying. So really the juggle this week, I think, is trying to make sure that what you're working on at the heart of your life, but also in terms of your connection to the wider world, are well aligned and can collaborate with one another. For example, if you work in a job which is well paid, perhaps has a certain amount of kudos, but doesn't feed your soul, over the next half year you may decide to change. On the other hand, if you're in a job which doesn't pay you particularly well, but you really like the people and it may work in terms of fitting in with your family needs, it may be one that you continue to pursue. Now, Uranus, the planet of innovation, but also of provocation, does go retrograde this week in your sector of relationships, but it does also continue to forge a stunning alliance to Pluto, the planet of transformation. There can be some dazzling connections that continue right through to the end, the first week of November. And you could meet people who have a sense of excitement or stimulation around them. But I feel that this lunar eclipse this week is asking you to also stay in touch with not just how stimulating people are, but also whether you feel comfortable, safe and at ease in a more emotional or even professional way too. Capricorn, your week beginning the 1st of September is going to see some very important conversations. It could be discussing a contractual matter, maybe a vacation. You could be doing some long-term planning about higher education. There is a sense of excitement, but it will be important to make sure the details are absolutely spot on. But this is where your ruler, the legendary Saturn, can be of great help. Now he inverts in his retrograde back into the sign of Pisces on Monday, but that's just going to help you to be very exacting. If you're looking over a document or thinking of sending a text message, you're going to just take that much extra care. Now Mercury, the communicator, moves into a very exciting part of your chart, and through the next 3 weeks you may want to be more spontaneous, particularly about doing things that are off the beaten track. It may be to do with traveling somewhere that can stimulate your senses. But because there's a lunar eclipse also in the sign of Pisces, where Saturn has moved to on Saturday, but very close to the point of destiny, an idea you've got and also the way you share it could be hugely important for you, not just this week, but over the next 6 months, because that's the backdrop of the lunar eclipse, but it's because Jupiter, the planet of fortune, links to that lunar eclipse and that north node. So you have a reputation of competence, of someone who accepts responsibilities, you take them seriously, but I feel that Jupiter being in the mix can just help you to connect to people in a very enthusiastic way, and that can be very encouraging to them. So if you are wanting to push forwards with a plan, it is giving you a chance to reform your situation in some kind of fresh way, particularly with Uranus continuing, even if it goes retrograde, in the part of your chart to do with your everyday routines. As this week goes on and we have that lunar eclipse over the next half year, just linking with others in a way which reflects your feelings, but also your ideas with clarity, efficiency, but also connecting to them in a meaningful way is something that could see you developing a major opportunity and having a huge breakthrough over this next half year. Aquarius, your week beginning the 1st of September, sees your 2 co-regents or co-rulers of traditional Saturn and modern Uranus right at the heart of the celestial proceedings. On Monday, Saturn returns for one final 5.5 month period in this big 29.5 year cycle to the sign of Pisces, which will culminate fully in the middle of February, just before there's a new eclipse series in your sign, which begins on the 17th of February. So what you've been working on broadly over the last couple of years, I feel, is firming up your life foundations, but perhaps also establishing some new beginnings, because some things that may have provided an income may have dried up or changed, or perhaps you've been using the industry of Saturn to become much more conscious of your self-worth and value. Because there's a lunar eclipse which occurs on Saturday, also in Pisces, but very close to the North Node or the point of destiny, it is important to trust the process, but also be in touch with the more instinctive side of things. So if Saturn has felt a little bit burdensome over these last couple of years, just know that Jupiter, the planet of luck, links brilliantly with that lunar eclipse. And if you do continue to show your discipline and balance that part of your nature which appreciates tradition and hard work, but also is open to innovation, with Uranus, your modern ruler, going retrograde on Friday, he is going to continue to forge a stunning alliance to Saturn, but also to Pluto in your sign. So your eye for opportunities, whether it's through fashion, music, clothes, culture, or it is in a more innovative sense in terms of business is still going to be very sharp. It's just that Uranus retrograde means that things might slow down a bit, but it's going to get down more to that foundational level. So I feel that your traditional ruler reasserts its authority, if you like. But we do have Mercury, the planet of communication, but also precision, dive in deep on Tuesday into a part of your situation which can give you a real gift for understanding what's not necessarily discussed. You may observe things or observe what people say, but your psychological analysis, often very strong, can really be amplified over the next 3 weeks. If you are wanting to reap the benefits of something you have shown tremendous discipline around over these last couple of years, Mercury can definitely help you. It's going to forge a gorgeous alliance with the Sun on the 13th, a Cazimi, the 4th of the year, which could be a breakthrough moment, particularly around long-term finances. But in the immediate situation now, if you are a little bit concerned about Saturn returning to Pisces, keep going through the processes. It is about being very reliable, hardworking, applied, showing some perspiration to go with the passion, which definitely comes from your modern ruler Uranus, and there's still dividends to be gained over this next half year on what you've been working on, perhaps quite historically. It might go back as long as 29.5 years ago. It could be just over 7 years ago, just over 14, perhaps even near to 22 years. But a culmination is going to show itself over this next 6 months. Pisces, your week beginning the 1st of September, is going to see your gorgeous traditional ruler of Jupiter. Very, very important to proceedings. Jupiter at the moment is for you in the 5th house, which is warm, affectionate. Cancer loves having Jupiter as a residence once every 12 or 13 years. It helps you to just look on the bright side of situations. And yet Saturn, which can create a reticence and perhaps lower our physical vitality, does return to your sign for one final visit in this big 29.5 year cycle on Monday through to the middle of February. It's saying, particularly if you've got planets or angles in the last decan of Pisces, that you need to prioritize, slim your world down, focus on what's really essential. With the lunar eclipse in your sign very close to the North Node, the more spiritual part of your life is very, very important, but you can be someone who's very self-sacrificing and very giving to others. And that's great, it's very noble, but your physical needs are important and they must come first. On the other side of the heavens, however, Mercury moves out of a very tense, brittle part of your chart, which may have created some stress in your situation, perhaps around work, since the end of June, and helps you to be diplomatic but very clear in terms of what you're saying to others. But the lunar eclipse, which occurs later this week, is not just linked to Jupiter in a very lovely trine, which is very enabling. Jupiter is also very supportive to the Sun in your sector of relating. So your sense of humour, your warmth, but also just having the courage to say what you need is something you can do. Do believe that. With Uranus, the planet of disruption, going retrograde in your sector of home and emotion, you can still make some changes to where you live, some adaptations, but you're needing to tune in deep within yourself. In Uranus is linked to Pluto, the planet of change. And I think, to summarise this week, in all parts of life, a good juggle between representing what we need to do for ourselves but being available for others is a great place to be. But at times, if that gets too much out of sync, we become too much people pleasers or we become too self-absorbed. That's not so good. So this is a week and the next half year when you have a chance to get the balance just so. Please join me at my new website at www.patrickarundell.com. There's loads of celestial goodies for you to enjoy, including downloading your free natal chart and wonderful interpretation.